Hi and welcome to Old Time Knowledge. Well, in this video I am going to be taking you through canning a recipe from my latest ball canning cookbook that I received as a Christmas gift, and it is pork and spicy broth. I absolutely love this recipe. Yes, I am starting at the end of the canning process just to show you what this looks like in the jars, because this is an amazing thing to can. I love it. I always want to have it on my shelf. It is very inexpensive to make, but it also just gives you perfect pork for you could use it for carnitas, you can use it for tacos de carnitas, you could use it for any kind of thing that you might want to use some spicy pork with. This is so good. So stick with me, and I'm going to take you through the process of canning this, but I'm also going to show you how I use this to make some tacos de carnitas. So stick with me and we'll get right to it. Alright, first let's talk about the cut of meat that I'm using for this. This is just a Boston butt. I actually bought this back before Christmas. It was on sale for 99 cents a pound. This was about 10 pounds of meat. Originally $24, but I got it for under $10, which is an amazing price. Of course, prices have gone up a lot since then, but you can still get this cut pretty cheap now and then. They'll have sales on it, so I highly recommend, if you see it on sale, buy some. Even if you can't can it right away, put it in your freezer, and then when you're able to can it, then you can take it out and thaw it and process it, and you'll be so happy that you have it. So let's move ahead. Alright, so I have my oven preheating to 425 degrees. When you make this, it recommends that you, in your oven, roast the pork first, and you're going to cut it into cubes that are about 1.5 inches, something like that. If they're a little bigger, it's not a big deal. One thing you're going to want to do when you're using a cut of meat like Boston butt is it has a lot of fat. So I was just showing you that fat. If there's big pieces of fat, you want to get rid of those. You don't want those in your jars, and the reason why is because the fat will break down and it will ultimately cause siphoning, and that's just a problem. You'll end up not having a successful canning process. So what I'm doing here is I am just cutting up this pork and getting it on that pan, and I'm going to put it in my oven once it gets to be 425 degrees so that it will roast. Now the recipe does recommend that you use some oil to toss the meat in before you roast it, but it doesn't make any sense to me because it's already got plenty of fat. The fat will sort of baste it as it's roasting. You're not going to necessarily cook it all the way. You're going to cook it until it starts browning. And then once it starts browning, that's when you're going to move to the process of making your broth and then getting it in the jars and canning it. So I'm just going to continue here, cutting this up and getting it ready, and then I'll take you to the next step. Well, actually, one thing I wanted to mention is, because of the amount of fat that comes from something like this, by all means, if you want to render your own lard, this is a perfect cut of meat to do that with, because you're going to get a lot of fat from this. Also, you're probably not going to, with a Boston butt this size, you might not get all of the meat on a pan, like one pan, just because this is a ton of meat. So I'm just getting as much on here as I can. Also, when it comes to the seasoning and things like that, you're going to be adding salt to the broth. So I don't know if it matters a whole lot. Even in the instructions, it says to salt and pepper the pork while it's roasting. You can do that. But you also can just add the salt to the broth, because I think it's going to come out the same. I think it's going to be fine either way. Also, you're going to be left with a bone, which is what I have here. And I mean, if you want to do something with the bone, you can. In my case, I didn't worry about doing anything with the bone, but that's totally up to you. If you wanted to make bone broth from it, I suppose you could, but I don't typically make bone broth from pork. Alright, so here it is. It's all cut up and ready. My oven's at 425. So I'm just going to move this pork into the oven and roast it until it starts browning, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, while the pork is roasting, we're going to make the broth. So as you see here, I am just slicing up an onion into really thin slices, and I'm going ahead and adding it to my pot. I'll be adding in water in a minute. And you're actually supposed to use chicken broth, so I'll be adding chicken bouillon because I don't keep broth on the shelf typically for things like this. So anyway, you're just going to, like I say, slice up the onion into really thin slices. Alright, so now I need to add the liquid. I'm just going to get some water in this quart jar. The recipe calls for 2 quarts of water, so that's what I'm adding. And you can double the amount of broth if you're doing more meat. I'm going to put all of the amounts for everything in the description below. But the ingredients are, you're going to have your liquid, you're going to have oregano, crushed red pepper, then you're going to also have black pepper, and you're also going to have salt, and then of course in my case I'm adding the bouillon powder because I'm not using chicken broth, as I've said before. And so these are all of the ingredients that you need for this broth, and it's really tasty. The broth itself is really good. I've heard some people even just use this to make soup, and I suppose you probably could use this and put in some hominy and make some quick pozole. You might want to add some red chilies to it so that it'll be more of the kind of sauce you would have with pozole. But let me bring this to a boil. And of course this is sped up, so the idea is you want to bring it to a boil, and then once it comes up to a boil, you're going to reduce it to a simmer and simmer it for about 5 minutes. And then at that point, once your pork is ready, then you'll be ready to make your jars. Y'all, I totally forgot the garlic. I have got to add garlic to this. It calls for 3 cloves of garlic, but I just put in a bunch of garlic because I like a lot of garlic, and I don't think you can have too much in something like this. But the garlic is super, super important, and as I said, everything will be in the description below as far as ingredients. Okay, so it's been 5 minutes after it's boiled. Well, and I had put it on simmer, but it was still boiling because that's my stove. But the broth is ready, so let me get the pork out of the oven because it is ready as well. As you can see, it is definitely browned. It might have cooked a little longer than I had needed it to, but I don't care. I want to make sure it's really done and really ready. So now I'm going to get the pork in the jars and get the broth in the jars and get this canned up. Speeding this up. I got my big funnel here. I'm going to go ahead and get the meat in each of the jars. And for the broth, I'm going to be doing something, they don't tell you to do this, but I do it because the onions are in the broth, and the onions are important to be in each jar. You want the onions in each jar. Ultimately, I end up putting the onions in right behind the pork, and then I add in the broth. And I'll be making sure that this is all even and balanced out so that the right amount of pork is in each jar. If I have to move some around, I will. But I also know that once I add the broth in, everything's going to settle. The big thing is you want to debubble these once you've added the liquid. Make sure there's no air pockets in there. So as you can see, I'm just adding some onion to each jar because there's some wonderful onion in that pot, and I just want to make sure that each jar gets some. And it's kind of hard sometimes to get all that up with the ladle. So I'm doing it this way. But then once each jar has, I think, an equal amount of the pork and the onions, then that's where I'll go in and actually add the broth. And here I am adding the broth to each jar, and each jar got about a cup of water, and they're pint jars, so ultimately it ends up being, they end up being about half full of meat and half full of liquid. And that's not unusual when you're adding liquid to any kind of meat. But making sure they're within an inch head space, and then that's it. So now I've got to get my canner started. I've got the right amount of water in there. I need to use a paper towel and wipe the rims of each of these jars because this is a greasy thing. You want to do this all the time anyway, whether you use vinegar or water, but because this is meat, and especially because this is a greasy meat, I'm using the vinegar because hopefully that will cut down on any grease that might be on the rims of the jars, which might prevent a seal. We want a good seal on these jars. So now I've got the lids on, I'm putting the rings on, the water is getting hot on the stove. I'm making sure that I've got a splash of vinegar in the water because I don't want mineral deposits on my jars, and then it'll be time to can them. By the way, I did debubble even though it doesn't show it in that last clip. Here I am just waiting for it to come up to 11 pounds pressure, which is appropriate for where I live. You need to check and see what it is where you live, but these are going to process for 75 minutes at 11 pounds pressure. I have a jiggler, so I love that. If you don't have one, I highly recommend it, and I'll link one below. But I'll bring you back when they're ready. All right, here we are when the whole process is done. They've processed for 75 minutes. The canner came down to 0. I waited, I lifted the lid. I'm bringing them out of the canner just to show you they have all processed beautifully. I'm so happy. I'm going to have these on my shelf. So after these have come completely down to room temperature, I'm going to put them in my pantry, and then in the next segment, I'll actually be having a video about how I make tacos de carnitas with these. Alright, so I have my cast iron skillet. Here is a jar of the pork and spicy broth. I'm draining out a little bit of the liquid because I'm doing it in my pan. And I'm leaving, there's some fat that's in the jar from where I canned it. There's some fat that'll settle on top, and that's totally normal. But that fat will help brown this a little bit in the pan. In the cookbook, they recommend actually warming this in the oven so it can get toasty, and that's fine, you can do that. But in this case, I had something else in my oven, and so I'm just doing this on my stove top. So I'm just getting this pork heated up, and then, you know, as the liquid cooks down, I'm going to end up draining some of the liquid out and getting the pork kind of toasty, kind of like it would be if it was in the oven. Meanwhile, I'm chopping up my cilantro and getting that ready. And so this is just so good. You know, I'm going to be using salsa verde with this. I'll be putting a little bit of onion on top. If you have some avocado or guacamole, you can have that. But I'm just showing you what I'm making to have with it today. This is where I've drained out a little bit of the liquid, and I'm sauteing it a little bit more so it'll get a little bit more crispy in the pan. And you can also add a little oil to this if you want, but I don't find that I need to. I like it just fine like this. That's the particular brand of salsa verde that I have. So next, I've got to heat up the tortillas. I've got some corn tortillas here. You can use flour if you want, but I use corn tortillas for these. It's more traditional. Just getting these nice and toasty. You can get them as warm as you like, as toasty as you like. I like mine kind of toasty. So that's what I'm doing. And then once I have them all heated up, I'm making myself some tacos. And this is it, y'all. This is so simple. It's so easy. It's a super quick, delicious lunch, delicious meal. And there's definitely enough pork here for probably somewhere between 4 to 6 tacos. You don't put a ton of meat in each of these. You know, you just put in as much as you want. You can spread it over more tacos. More tacos is better, right? So there we have it, friends. Roasted pork in spicy broth, which you can can up and keep in your pantry and have it ready to make some delicious tacos de carnitas or just carnitas. You can serve with rice and beans. You can use this pork for so many different things. Anyway, I hope that you'll try it. I hope you'll let me know what you think in the comments below. What other kinds of things do you love to can to have on your shelf that you can go to as a quick meal? Just to make a good use of meats that you can buy that are inexpensive, that you can have stored to feed your family. Let me know. I want to hear what you think. Also, if you like this video, give it a like. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, and I thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.